Uh, Alex, Alex Epstein, welcome on the show, man. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing great, man. I know we're both out in California. I know this quarantine isn't too bad out here. I mean, it's getting right into that summer mode where there's no clouds in the sky. We have these really cool bioluminescent lights showing up. I think like down
Yeah,
now
I
where
would
where
say
you are.
that. I mean, the government definitely gets no credit for that. But yeah, I've taken up surfing actually somewhat illegally in certain cases. But yeah, I was in San Clemente the other night and got to surf in the bioluminescent ocean, which is amazing.
Oh man, yeah, I'm trying to get out there this weekend to check it out. It is odd that you say that 'cause I know if I just went out to Santa Monica, which would be closer beach to me, like they're passing out $1,000 tickets now, so you gotta head a little bit more south.
A
I think
$1,000.
yeah, I think your
Yeah.
your your entire county down there is like want to say suing or just countering the government, the state of California and the governor. So
Hmm.
it's it's interesting. I think these are weird times. No one really knows how to treat and handle the situation, and we're all trying to figure it out. Everybody's getting a bad and hard rap on how to treat it properly, but whether you're the president, you're getting a hard time. Whether you're the governor of California, it's weird. It's weird stuff.
Yeah,
And
I've actually been, I know we're talking about energy, but I've been commenting on this a lot. So if people are interested, if you just YouTube my name and search Power Hour, which is my podcast, you can see my comments on it.
oh, sweet. What's your power hour about? What's the show
Well,
power hour?
Power Hour. So it's a podcast about power, or really about energy. So I just recorded one about 5 minutes before this. And so it's just about interesting energy issues, energy, climate. I'm sure many of the things we'll talk about, but so
Hmm.
often a current issue in the news, or in this case, I talked recently about the Michael Moore movie, Planet of the Humans, which had come out and probably has 10 million people who viewed it so far. So yeah, that's my energy podcast.
Yeah, I mean, we could jump right into that right there. I'm guessing you've seen the documentary. I watched it the other day. It was
Hmm.
it's a pretty interesting take. It's somebody, who primarily is, you know, politics always seems to overflow into areas like this, whether whatever side of the climate or energy argument you're in on, and Michael Moore being more on the left, and going against, you know, kind of a lot of the norms and things that I think that you go against, and where it's just like, hey, we've been told that for the longest time this stuff is the worst. Our planet's going to die, we're going to die. It's a very alarmist and negative standpoint on how to do and how fast we
Hmm.
can combat um, some of the issues or some of the facts or studies that people have been putting out there. And he goes even one further that that there's no way that any of the stuff that they are doing is happening or is working or is making the environment better. What did you
Hmm.
take from it?
Yeah, so I think your summary is accurate. I'd think of it as the starting premise is that fossil fueled civilization is destroying the planet, and then the usual view is, well, green or renewable energy is going to come to the rescue. So it's going to allow us to have a similar standard of living, but without the supposed destruction of the planet. And basically, what Planet of the Humans says is no, any kind of modern industrial civilization that uses the amount of energy that we do is going to destroy the planet. So green energy is no solution. And the thing that I disagree in terms of the destroying the planet, which we could definitely talk about, but I do agree that it makes a lot of valid points about green energy. Most people think of green energy with a kind of halo above it, like, oh, this is some magical process where just the sunlight flows in and then we get electricity and it's just totally clean and it's perfect. And what he points out in the movie is whether you're talking about sunlight or wind or batteries, these are all very industrial processes. They involve massive impacts of our environment to mine the materials, to transport the materials, to assemble the different kinds of elements, they take up huge amounts of space, and there are a lot of unpleasant byproducts. And so he's a lot bringing attention to this, and then he's also bringing attention to the fact that with solar and wind, because they're based on what you can call intermittent or unreliable inputs, namely the sunlight and the wind are not continuous, controllable sources of energy. There's a huge dependence on the controllable or reliable sources of energy, mostly fossil fuels and to some extent hydro and nuclear. So in those respects, in terms of green energy does have a big impact, that's important. And then also that it's very dependent on fossil fuels, that's important as well. But then I totally disagree with the conclusion, well, we're just all screwed until we, in effect, eliminate a lot of humans, which is the not so subtle implication of the movie.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a really great quote, and it's one of my big questions for everything that you're going in, because it's infinite growth on a finite planet, it's suicide, our human presence is already far beyond sustainability, and that it implies that then it implies, and like you mentioned in your book, and you go into detail, it's like the amazing benefits of the technology and what have fossil fuels for done for the levels of technology that we've had. I'm someone who's been to 50 countries. I've lived all around the world. I've seen the benefits for peoples all around the world. The implement of different technologies, and as well as coal, fossil fuel, or gasoline or oil that these places might never had. Whether that's even just adding a road into their town, into their village, that they wouldn't have experienced before. So it's interesting to see how much more and how far we can push the planet, as well as push the people. And I know that is your biggest argument and case. And how far do you think that we can push this planet if we're continuously growing on a population scale and continuously to use the certain energy outputs or energy inputs such as fossil fuels?
I think when we hear ideas like, our way of life is unsustainable,
Mm.
one question to ask is, what's the track record of this idea? Like, what, and in particular, the people making these claims or people who've made similar claims, what's the track record? And one thing I talk about in the first chapter of the moral case for fossil fuels, and a little bit in the eighth chapter, is that there's a huge track record of what I would call environmental catastrophism, which is basically saying that humans having a lot of impact on our environment is going to lead to catastrophe. And maybe the longest standing view is, well, we're going to run out of resources, right? We're going to use more, and then the planet only has so much to give us, and we're going to run out. And the first thing to know about this idea, to be suspicious of it, is that these predictions have been made for 200 plus years, and they've continuously come false. So you've had people say, we're going to run out of food, we're going to run out of metal, we're going to run out of oil. And in general, what happens is, you can think of it as we run into them. We have more and more and more. And one interesting graphic that the movie uses, although I think misuses it, it shows basically in the last 150 years, I forget exactly the timetable, maybe even just 100 years, or 200, let's just say 200 years, there's a tenfold increase in the human population on Earth, and then a tenfold increase in income. And Jeff Gibbs, the director, says this is the most terrifying realization I've ever had, because it's basically there's 100 times more impact on the world, because 10 times as many humans with 10 times as much income, which basically means resources. But if you think about that, 100, 200 years ago, people were saying we were already running out of resources. So how is it that we were running out of resources then, and now we use 100 times as much as a species?
Mm-hmm.
And we still haven't run out. And even with something like oil, what's the problem right now? We're running into it, right? There's too much of it, in a sense. The price is plummeting. So I think the history of this idea should make us suspect there's something deeply wrong with this idea that it's a finite planet that we're going to run out of. And the key fallacy here is the idea that human beings are parasites, that nature gives us a finite amount of resources, and that all we can do is consume and extinguish them. In reality, human beings are producers who can create new resources. So you think of aluminum, for example. Aluminum is one of the most abundant materials in the earth. Is aluminum a valuable resource? Most people would say yes. But 300 years ago, it wasn't a resource at all. It was useless, because we didn't have the ingenuity to transform that raw matter into a resource. And so what human beings have is, we have minds that enable us to transform raw matter and energy into usable resources. And if you have that perspective, and if you just think of the earth as a ball of raw matter and energy, and the universe as an unlimited source of raw matter and energy, then you realize, wait, we can just become more and more productive as we have more and more ingenuity to figure out how to produce more and more things. So that's the reason why life keeps getting better and better, even though people think it'll get worse, because we're falsely regarded as parasites when actually we are resource producers.
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting what's going on with oil right now. I think it's a big hit to any green car or green energy, because you're getting paid to store oil. So if you own a warehouse in Oklahoma or Texas, you could literally buy a warehouse and get thrown $30 a barrel just to take our oil from us. I
I don't think it's a long-term investment. That I wouldn't advise people to do exactly that. But yeah.
I mean, it's going to be interesting, like you said, to see, what comes out of this. Are oil prices going to be able to stay this low, especially with,
Hmm.
the amount of, I think, what President Trump tried to do was limit the amount of output that, Russia, Saudi Arabia, even us, to put, down to 10 million barrels a day. But that just went into effect 5 days ago. I think
Hmm.
oil is just sitting in the middle of the ocean or right off the coast of oceans. I mean, to buy a container ship. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how low and how long gas prices could stay low. Or at the same time, if we have so much of it, and maybe you could answer this question better, why are the prices remain so high, or is that still at a state by state case?
You mean, oh, the gasoline prices?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not something I'm a super expert on. I mean, I know
Okay.
some of the dynamics, which is one is just it takes a while of it being sustained at a low level before people can really afford to lower prices. Because if you don't know how long it's going to be at a lower price, it doesn't really do you that much good to like lower your price dramatically and then you raise it and then you make people angry. But if it's a sustained lower price, then eventually people will compete you down whether you wanted to or not, because people think, oh, it's going to be $30 a barrel oil, I can beat out the local gas station by charging lower prices, and ultimately they'll have to comply too. So it's
Hmm.
longer term things. And then places like California where we live, we have all sorts of specific mandates that make our gasoline some of the most expensive in the US. I'm curious, by the way, I forgot to look into this. Why is this called the Bus Driver Podcast?
Oh, because that's the character I play. I'm the bus driver.
But were
Uh,
you actually a bus driver?
so I used to be a professional basketball player, college basketball player, professional basketball player. Um,
Where?
I played at Syracuse, and then I played in Israel, Canada, Ukraine, Poland,
Wow.
Holland.
Did you play when they won the championship?
No, we did win 2 Big East championships, but all my wins ended up getting forfeited and taken away due to one guy not going to class, a bunch of NCAA scandals, not pertaining to me at all. I was not a part of those. But
Wow.
all your wins get taken away. So now I'm back to went from one of the most winningest players to the least winningest player in school history, especially everybody in my class, or all of us who were there during my,
Hmm.
my tenure. And so I got into podcasting when I got off when I stepped away from basketball and I stepped away from coaching. And it's been the past 3 years taking the show all around the world, even on a bus. I took a bus from Utah all the way to Chile, because it's not just about interviewing people. I create and produce a video story that goes along with the show itself.
Hmm.
And yeah, I'm taking you on a journey through my eyes, and I'm gonna, shine a light and have interesting conversations with people such as yourself, and get their take on the world, especially what they specialize in or what they're interested in.
Awesome. Sorry if that was a redundant question for the audience, but
No, no,
that was
not at all, not at all. Yeah, it's not very based off of anything. It's just the character I play. It's the nickname I have, and I actually just went on a project with this company out in Venice, the Venice Basketball League, and they were looking for a basketball playing bus driver, and you know, I got the call. I got the call up for that, and we have this 501c. We have this bus we converted to a basketball machine, and we drove it from here to Chicago to convert a basketball court out in the west side of Chicago, like I would say underserved community that probably would
hmm.
never be able to go to an NBA All-Star game. And we kind of remodeled and raised a bunch of funds to build them this brand new basketball court in this community center, and create an entire 5-day event with tens of thousands of people, like their own NBA All-Star experience
Hmm.
there, mixed in with the NBA All-Star experience, from creating merch like these t-shirts with this big company, Avery Dennison, who actually makes all the patches for NFL and NBA and the MLB jerseys. And we just created like a whole little like experience out of it. So it was really cool, and it was really enriching to be a part of.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I kind of do it all: the conversations, the content creation, and bringing information and news back to people.
Cool.
That's what it's all about. But let's go back into let's take it into your book. And you wrote this book back in 2012 or 2014, was it?
2014.
2014. And this goes, just so the title of the book, I know pops eyes on people, and then even the premise of the book and where you stand throws a bunch of it brings people's grabs people's attention right away. Like, whoa,
Hmm.
what, why? So again, give us a little a history or a background, a brief. What got you to want to write this book, and where it's taken you up to today.
Sure. So the title of the book is The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels.
Hmm.
So it's it strikes people because usually you think about the moral case against fossil fuels. We're told that we're morally obligated to rapidly eliminate fossil fuel use to save the planet. And so it's unusual to say, for somebody to say, no, actually, we should continue and increase fossil fuel use over the next several decades, which is the premise of my book. Often people think, oh, well, this must be a stunt where the oil industry somehow found me and offered me a bunch of money to say this. I didn't even know anyone in that industry or anyone in the energy industry when I came up with my ideas. And I don't come from a place that's pro fossil fuels. I grew up in a place called Chevy Chase, Maryland, which is a super liberal place in the DC area. So the part of my background I think was really relevant is I decided when I was 20, I wanted to be what I would call a practical philosopher. So I wanted to use philosophy, which is considered impractical, but I think of as very practical because it teaches you how to think very logically and precisely about issues. And I wanted to apply it to really important issues, but that were also really complex and hard to think through. And maybe 7 years into my career, I started happening on energy. And I really had known nothing about energy, had very little interest. All I had heard was, well, the main energy we're using, fossil fuels, they're destroying the planet. And my guess at the time was that was exaggerated, but I certainly had no affinity for fossil fuels. But then I really started studying it from the perspective of, if we really weigh the benefits and the side effects of the alternative, so we don't just look at the benefits of solar and the side effects of fossil fuels, but we look at the pros and cons of both with as much precision and accuracy as we can, like what's actually the path forward. And I was surprised to conclude that I really thought that fossil fuels were on balance really crucial. And the main two reasons are, one is that they're by far the lowest cost way of producing energy for billions of people. And I think that's something that's not really understood. And then the other thing is that the side effects, they do have side effects, including, I do believe they have a warming influence on climate, but I think those are very exaggerated. So if you think about it in terms of the benefits versus the side effects, like you'd think about a vaccine or antibiotic where you always have to weigh those kinds of things, I think of as fossil fuels as like this wonder drug, but we're so fixated on the negative and we have such a tendency to exaggerate it that we can't see that billions of people are going to have better lives if we're allowed to use this, because it's going to allow billions of people to have energy, which means really the miracle of having machines do our work for us. As you think about like incubators, hospitals, certainly during COVID-19, we should really be thinking about how amazing machine power is. And really, if we can use fossil fuels, billions of people can have the miracle of machine power. And if we don't, billions of people are going to have far less of it or none of it. And we already are in a world where 3 billion people have almost no machine power. They're using very little electricity and they're heating their homes and cooking their food with wood and animal dung. So my view is priority number one is the world needs a lot more energy. Fossil fuels are by far the lowest cost way of producing it. They do have side effects, but the side effects are worth it given the benefits.
All right. Now, how and why is your belief just way so is either very, very small or doesn't really, not many people have or share that same belief as you have? Why is it that so many more people are just going with the contrary?
Well, I think I don't know how, I mean, I think millions of people at this point agree with my belief substantively,
Mhm.
definitely not the majority, but I've been able to, I don't know how many of the millions I've influenced. I mean, I've had millions of people see my stuff, but I'd say, I mean, definitely hundreds of thousands at least have been influenced by my perspective significantly.
Mhm.
So there's the question of why. And so part of it could just be, well, people were brought up like I was in a different perspective and it takes a while to shift. For me, the most interesting thing is, why are the specialists on the issue so at odds with me? So why do you have these groups of experts, smart people, different kinds of scientific societies, governments? Let's leave aside celebrities because they're mainly parroting those more form. But you think of like really smart people saying, yeah, moral case against fossil fuels. We need to rapidly eliminate them. And I think that I have two basic reasons what I think is going wrong. So one is actually I'll do three quickly. So one is, I think if you just observe the way even some of the really smart people talk about it, they're not looking carefully at the benefits and the side effects. They tend to just be looking at the side effects. And that's something I noticed early on. And my background in philosophy, I think, helps me notice that kind of thing. And even among smart people, it's a tendency to be biased to only look for negatives on things and positives on others. So I was really disturbed when I saw we're only looking for negatives about fossil fuels and nuclear and only looking for positives about solar and wind. So of course, we're going to conclude solar and wind are amazing and have no problems or have very few problems. So I think one is just the method of what I would call not looking at the full context, not looking at the benefits and the side effects. Um, Another one is, and this relates to what you asked earlier about sustainability and running out of resources. Uh, the idea that human impact on the planet is inevitably self-destructive. I think that's a very deep assumption people have. And the two versions are, if we impact the planet, we're going to run out of resources, but also we're going to make the planet dangerous. Like the more impact we have, the more dangerous the planet is. And that's a very common assumption. You just even hear when people say, well, climate change, they think if we're changing climate, it must be bad and it must be catastrophic. And it's really a religious kind of view that if we impact things, Mother Nature is going to punish us. It's like a hell kind of thing. Whereas that could sometimes happen, but often, usually when we change nature, it makes it much better. Like we drain a swamp of mosquitoes and we reduce or eliminate malaria in an area. So in general, human impact on the planet makes the world less dangerous, not more dangerous, but there's this assumption that it'll get more dangerous. And this is why, and there's assumption that even if there is some danger, it's a catastrophic danger. So this kind of false assumption that human impact is self-destructive leads people to expect huge amounts of destruction. And the more I look at the history of these ideas, the more I see, for example, with climate, that people have been predicting mass death from climate, like storms and floods and heat and cold, for 30 to 50 years. And yet we're safer than ever from climate. We are safer than ever from drought, from storms, from extreme heat, extreme cold. And it's because the planet is naturally very dangerous, including the climate is very dangerous. But the more power we have, the more machine power we have, the more we can master it. Basically, the more we can, build sturdy buildings, the more we can heat and cool ourselves, the more we can alleviate drought. And so people's assumptions that human impact is bad makes them expect things like climate catastrophe, even when for 30, 40, 50 years, we're actually mastering climate and being safer. So that's the first thing is people aren't looking at the full context. The second thing is they're assuming that human impact is self-destructive. And then the third thing is they're not consistently valuing human life. And this goes to Planet of the Humans. When they look at the planet today, they see this is a bad planet. Not just that it can't continue, they look at it today as bad. And yet from a human perspective, the planet has never been a better place to live. It's never been able to support more people with longer lifespans, more opportunity. And so what's going on is people, when they're measuring good and bad for the earth, they're not measuring good and bad from a human perspective. They're actually looking at it from the perspective of the rest of nature. They're saying impact is bad. We want to minimize impact. And versus my perspective is no, we want to maximize what I would call the flourishing of human beings. So our ability to live long, healthy, opportunity-filled lives. So that's the third thing. So if you're not looking at the full context, you're assuming impact is self-destructive, and you're not consistently valuing human life, then you can see something like fossil fuels, which have been making life amazing for 200 years. And you can not only not acknowledge how good it's made the world, but you can expect it's going to be a catastrophe. And you can do that for 50 years and be wrong for 50 years. And you're still like the fortune teller who thinks she's right, but gets it wrong. And so even smart people can make all three mistakes. And that's what I think is going on.
I think that we've definitely made amazing strides with, like you mentioned, the things of, the age of machines, what coal was able to do in the Industrial Revolution. And, like you said, having machines do the work for us. And there's no doubt that, like you mentioned, I think we've made the planet way more habitable for people. I mean, even when you go around, there's so much land we still can't use because, it's a desert, it's dry, there's no water there, there's no vegetation there. So I think the biggest argument that most of the people from like Planet of the Humans are coming from is, have we made it as good for us as we've made it for the other species on the planet? Because to them hey, we're in the middle of the fifth or sixth mass extinction. I don't know. I forgot what the number is on how many we've had in our existence, but it would be like,
They would say sixth.
that we're in the middle of the sixth mass extinction, that we're losing a certain level or number of species on this planet. So, I mean, as well as we've made this as the planet for humans, have we made it as good, or we've made it worse for the other species on there?
Yeah, so this goes to my third point, which is I think we're not looking at the planet from a human perspective. So it's really a philosophical issue how you think of the relationship between human beings and the rest of nature. And there's a caricature that you can have of views like mine where you view it as, well, I'm pro-human, which means that I'm anti every other species. But that makes no sense, because as concern about extinction implies, we benefit in many ways from other species. So the key, I think of it as, the pro-human perspective means we want the best relationship possible with the other species. And you can think about this and it means different things for different species. So if it's, malarial mosquitoes in a swamp nearby you, you want at least that local group of mosquitoes extinct. You don't want them in your area. If I think about my dog, for example, well, I want to put a lot of effort into giving him very high chances of survival and enjoying himself, that I have almost no concern for any other, I have no concern for any other non-human animal like I do for him. And then you think about a polar bear. Well, polar bear is my favorite animal, like, to look at. So I want to be able to look at polar bears, but they would certainly like to kill me under many circumstances. So I need to have a good relationship. So I'm not thinking about the other animals like I'm thinking about other humans, which is, I respect their rights. I don't use any kind of coercion against them. I'm not willing to kill them. I'm not willing to exploit them. No, we have to be willing to exploit and kill other species to benefit. That's just the nature of the survival of any species, and no other species has any compunction about that. They try to kill whatever they can. For us, it makes no sense to just try to kill everything, but we need to kill certain kinds of species, even if it's just plants, to eat. So I think of it as, what's the most beneficial relationship with the rest of nature? And I think overall, our relationship with the rest of nature has dramatically improved. And so with species extinction, the question is, well, is the idea to preserve every species? Because 99.9% of species in history have gone extinct. So I think of it as, well, we want to preserve species for aesthetic reasons, just because we think they're beautiful. And the richer we are, the more of a concern we can have with that. So that's part of why it's a good idea to have machine power and be rich. And then the other thing is looking at, well, are there types of species where there's important kinds of interdependence in ecosystems? And that's an important thing to look at, but you can't look at it as ecosystem is this fragile, delicate balance, and every species somehow is contributing to this perfect balance or web that helps us. That's just not true. The natural state of species and stuff didn't help us at all when it was totally, quote, natural 200 years ago. So we need to be intelligent about it. And generally what the catastrophists do is they have this view that nature is perfect, absent human impact. And so their view is, we can't change anything. And they have this expectation that any impact we have is going to be catastrophic. And with the species extinction, these are largely things where they're just completely making up numbers. They're not, when they say X million species are going extinct, they haven't cataloged those species. They're just totally making this stuff up with bogus models. But because people assume impact is bad, it's plausible to them, yeah, everything's going extinct. Even though if you look at, say, the number of extinctions among, let's say, the beautiful species that we care about, those have been plummeting as we've become wealthier. So I think we should be concerned about extinction in a rational way from a pro-human perspective, not in a hysterical way from an anti-human preserve the planet perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at. Just running through my head as you're going off on, what things are being extinct, what animals are being attacked, what natural habitats or ecosystems are being destroyed. You try and think and you weigh the ones out of, which ones maybe the victims of that, whether it's through whatever we're using for our energy inputs or fossil fuels, or whether it's just natural destructions of rainforest, which can be contributed to, let's just say, agriculture in general. So which ones go to which, And yeah, it's tough to say which, if one is towards the other, especially when we're trying to dictate which is coming from the climate warming and which one is coming from, some other man-made event that could be going on. Primarily,
But
I
you
would
have
say.
to, the people have to, I respect people on this issue if they acknowledge how amazing we've been making the world overall. If they say, yeah, we're making the world amazing, that's great. It's great to use energy and machines to transform the world to make it more human friendly. But I'm concerned about, say, bees in this respect. Like, I respect that kind of thing. But if people act like, oh, the world is terrible, we've ruined it, that's a non-starter for me. That person is not measuring things from a human perspective. And one memorable formulation I got from an economist named George Reisman is, he said, this is a paraphrase, but basically, listening to somebody with this anti-human perspective, an anti-human scientist, like listening to him in terms of what we should do about our environment is like listening to a doctor who's on the side of the germs. And I really take that seriously. Like, if you think that what human beings have done to this planet is overall bad, if you think us living to 80 instead of 30, like, that's a bad thing. If you think the amount of time we have, the amount of opportunity we have, the number of people who haven't died in childbirth, like, if that doesn't move you as this is really good, we want to make sure to preserve this and even expand this, then you're not pro-human. And another issue is animal testing. Like, there are scientists who are very knowledgeable about science who are anti-animal testing. They're not anti-animal testing because animal testing has no value. Animal testing, maybe it's overused some places, but it has incredible value. But they're not measuring good by the standard of humans. They're measuring good by the standard of the animals. And that's what I think most of the modern environmental movement is doing. Not most people who are sympathetic, but the leaders. It's an anti-human environmental movement. And I'm trying to be one of the leaders of the pro-human environmental movement who don't want to save the planet from human beings. We want to improve the planet for human beings.
Well, I would say those are just precautionary measures. Like we were talking about the
What's
quote
a precautionary measure?
well, like when you're using the one about the scientists saying, being on the side of germs. I think thinking about, where or how these things could negatively impact us, especially as being a social species we are, and seeing as how disease has been one of the major killers of our species for, over the span of our time. So, I think the
No, but
science.
side of the germs means they want the germs to win. So when you see with
Okay. Okay.
COVID-19, no, but people are saying this is great. You have a lot of leaders of the modern environmental movement saying, isn't it great how much human activity has decreased? And in the past, you have some of the leaders saying, we want the right virus to come along. So everything depends on what is your goal.
What
If
leaders
you're
have said that?
have said what?
That we want the right virus to come along. That's
It's
terrible.
Yeah, but it's chapter 1 of Moral Case for Philosophers. I have a bunch of quotes to this effect. So there is, I believe, a guy named David Graeber, who is a leading biologist. And there's I think Prince Philip, who's a major figure in the UK, has talked about this. And it's the implication, if you think that we have overpopulation, where there are too many of us, which certainly the Planet of the Humans is saying that, what are your options? I mean, you could kill people off deliberately, but sometimes people think, yeah, I just hope the right virus comes along. But even most people won't say that, but it's the implication. If you say there are too many people, that means you want something to happen to radically reduce the number of people quickly.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wouldn't think, in the case of our planet during our time, it's not really the case of the people count still. It's a matter of getting the people the resources and the tools to use. We have enough food. We can't feed everybody, though, and we still can't find a way to get everybody food. And the same thing goes with, like you said, we obviously have an abundance of oil and other energies, fossil fuels that we could use. We talked about even right now with the massive demand that's dropping right now, but we still can't get this to people. So in a perfect world, how do we make sure we make the world better for people, especially, in, where you're going, where you want it to go is like, the more we can benefit people, the more we can get them the capabilities of the machines and the fossil fuels.
Well, so with food, it's important that, it's not perfect, but it's been improving dramatically. And so
it absolutely is improved. Yeah.
So the key, but the key is, I think the key is to look at where are the places where there's virtually no problem. And then how do you extend that to the places that there are problems? Because if you look at the places that are poorest, they're not just like randomly distributed throughout the US and Europe, and certain places in the African continent, and then certain places in Asia, the overwhelming amount of it. And what you can see is so much of it comes down to political systems. There's a reason why the US became so prosperous, and it's because we had the most freedom. Freedom is really the key to productivity, because freedom allows the individual to think freely and then to create value and then to benefit from that. And that's what we've had in the US. If you look at a lot of places, in Africa, for example, it's very, very hard to build like an electric grid, because of the laws, because it's very hard to go in there and to build something and to make a profit, because they don't have good laws that protect businesses and enable them to make a profit. And so that's just one small example. But the key is all human beings around the world have the capability to produce a lot of value and to survive and to flourish. Like we all have, we're all genetically incredibly similar. We all have amazing human brains. But the key is, do we live in a political system that empowers us? That's why in the US, we have people come over from the poorest places in the world and they become incredibly prosperous. Why is that? Because of the political systems. I think most fundamentally, the key to universal prosperity is universal freedom. It's great that people can come here, and I love that. And my family is ultimately from that. And so I think that's fantastic. But the only way to do it for billions of people is for the other countries to become freer and to learn the best lessons of the free countries.
Well, I mean, I don't know if we can explain it's totally freedom, because we can look at the case of China right now. And, if you look at the amount of, like, I think what happened with the United States is, a blend of manufacturing plus being that base of manufacturing, what happened after World War II. And I mean, look at China right now. I mean, with the amount of people they've brought out of poverty, and the amount of money that's been able to be pumped in there. And it's not necessarily due to freedom. We can all say that about China. They, they aren't the beacon of, freedom and freedom of choice to be able to move and do what you want, do what you please.
Well, but economically, I mean, but so freedom, you can think of freedom as a singular thing, but you can also think of it as having many subdivisions. So in the context of economic freedom, and particularly if you think about industrial freedom, so the ability to actually build different kinds of factories and power plants and all kinds of other things, they do in effect have something where people are free to do that and to make money. And so that's why you have increasing numbers of billionaires there. And it's a totally different situation than places where you can't start a business and make money. The other thing with China is there's a lot of, and other places is there's a lot of, once a free country innovates something or free people innovate something, most innovation comes from free places, then other people can copy it. And that's, I mean, leaving aside if it violates intellectual property, it's overwhelmingly a good thing that over time we can learn more. So even a less free country now can use some of what the free countries have developed. But if you just want to talk about the average individual, not only being productive, but also being able to live a life that they have control over, which that's a huge issue in China, the inability to do that in many ways. You need freedom for that too. But we're focused on if you just think about what's going to make the poor parts of the world, they're always increasing in freedom. And if you compare China now to China with Mao and the Great Leap Forward, where the government is just randomly having a few people order certain people to go on farms and just ultimately killing millions of people, it's an incomparably freer country than it was 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I don't think that they definitely have a lot more accessibility towards, like you say, machines or oil or natural gas. I think one of the biggest problems with China is that they they need to import so much natural resources, especially oil or fossil fuels, because they don't have it. I don't know about their coal stores, but I know that's definitely the case with oil itself. But I still think that it's tough for people in the rest of the world, or to say that we have the best case scenario. Talk about because totally mindset, attitude, and positive philosophy towards everything that's happening and going on is an easy thing to do. But I mean, we're born and we're birthed with all those resources, where we were fortunate to have those accessibilities. Is it just government that's restricting and limiting, or is it the accessibility to these tools or to these resources?
But what
Who's
do you
hindering the people from being able to receive You know, I would say the people in other parts of the world, those 3 billion people who don't have,
Yeah, but if you look at a
is it?
place like Japan, is it that they're drowning in amazing resources? No, but they have, they have a system of, I mean, there are cultural reasons too, but
Yeah,
you
definitely
need
cultural
you
there.
need the government. I mean, what you need is for the individual to be free to create value. That's
Hmm.
what needs to happen. When individuals are free to create value and trade with one another, really good things happen. And you see that when that happens, you can have individuals, even in places with very few quote unquote natural resources, you can see them thrive. And then when you don't have freedom, you can see places with a lot of natural resources suffer. And what sometimes will happen, and there's a lot of tragedy there, is you'll have places with a lot of resources, and the only thing that'll happen is foreign people will come with an oil company or something like that, but the majority of people in the country will be very poor. And I think this happens in a lot of places around the world. And so I think sometimes there are unethical deals that in terms of people coming into countries, but the main thing that's going on is those countries need property rights and freedom for their own citizens. That's when people look at, oh, the US is so wealthy, other places are less wealthy. It's not that nature gave us this pile of stuff and we're just gobbling it up. No, it's that we have more productive ability ultimately because we're freer. And so the key thing is not to send our stuff somewhere else, but is to encourage others to liberate their people.
Hmm. Oh no, I don't think it is the fact of just passing out natural resources and pieces of equipment, but it's a matter of to point on what you're saying, but to how do we make sure that that availability is there, especially in a time where the processes of information, the process of knowledge, or the power to have all these tools is just there. So we can't say that people. I mean, is it again? Is it just that they aren't hardworking, or what would be limiting them, or is it just government that is restricting them, and certain levels of people don't want them to be prosperous?
I mean, there's government and ideas,
Hmm.
but government. The thing is, you mentioned we've got a lot more communication now, so it's a lot easier to get access to good ideas, good mindsets. But if you're in a place where you're really not free, it's really hard to start a business and make money off it, and that's a really difficult situation to be in. So I just reaffirm that I think political freedom
Hmm.
should be the key focus, and I don't think of it as it's our responsibility to do that for everybody. I think it's the responsibility of governments to empower individuals to make the best of their own lives. Individuals are very creative alone and cooperating with others if we are liberated. So it's not that those of us who have become successful, our focus should be like somehow how do we give our stuff away to those who aren't successful. It's liberating everyone to be successful, because we earn in the US, we've largely earned what we have. We haven't taken it. Everyone was poor 200 years ago. We haven't taken it from people. We've created it. And other people can create just as much or more if they're free.
Oh, a little bit. We've taken a little bit over the
But that's
years.
not where that's not where, I mean, that's not, if you look at the history, there's much more exploitation in the US and outside the US before 200 years ago. If you look at even times of slavery, the standard of living then compared to the standard of living now, it's not
Hmm.
like Steve Jobs is like, it's not like that's a slave situation. That's a situation of creating value. So yeah, I mean, people, you can always focus on the history of the way things work out.
Hmm.
The history of the way things work out is messy, but there's just this fundamental of free people trading with one another, creating value, prospering in a mutually beneficial way, where in general, if we're free to produce and trade, we can all benefit over time. And so that's what people should be looking at
Hmm.
if they want to know how do we have more success in the world.
No, I mean, I was a major of history, and I totally. It's not about dwelling on the negative and dwelling on what were the terrible reactions on. It's improving upon them and looking at the terrible or the great that was happening, and continuously to improve upon. It's never that history actually repeats. It's the fact that we can look back and we can just continuously do the same things because the same themes will overlay. It's never actually the same events happen over and over again. That people I think fail to look at. And where was I going to go with that? But I'll jump on the next one. So in terms of using fossil fuels and oil, how I know we, like with new technologies, we're able to continuously find new sources of them, especially when we look at fracking, what it's done for natural gas in the United States. But how long can we continuously use fossil fuels and how continuously do you think, because I think it's a betting game, just like with anything, that we'll be able to innovate out of this, or innovate our way we do come into a problem, or innovate our way when something bad does happen?
Well, it depends what you mean by this. Is the categories of bad people usually bring out are one, we're going to run out, or
Mhm.
two, it's going to make the planet uninhabitable. So which one of those do you want me to, because those are two, I think they're related in terms of the
Mhm.
false assumptions behind them, but it sounds like you're more worried about the supply side of it.
No. Supply, it would be more on the other side. Like how long can we continuously use it, in terms of, especially if we're going to be using more, and we've only seen a negative impact on the environment in terms of the use of the fuels themselves.
Well, but I was trying to explain before why I don't think we've only seen a negative view. I think a negative impact on our environment. I think our environment has overwhelmingly become better. So if you look at terms of how accessible is clean water, even how clean is the air the average person breathes now with modern fossil fuels compared to wood or animal dung that are in the more natural parts of the world and that our ancestors used. Our air is cleaner and getting cleaner. Our safety from climate is greater. The amount of food that we have access to is greater. So from a human perspective, I keep saying this, but I keep emphasizing, the planet is getting better and better. And so it's not that there are no side effects, but in general, the side effects continue to go down. And I think that mostly what we want is people are looking at the planet from an anti-human perspective. So they're seeing we've impacted the planet a lot, and they think that's bad because they think the goal is to impact the planet minimally. Whereas I think the goal is to make the planet as human friendly as possible. So I think we've made it better. So I don't see a problem. You could ask with CO2 levels, okay, well, we've increased the CO2 in the atmosphere from 0.03% of the atmosphere to 0.04% of the atmosphere. We've experienced, let's say, 2 degrees Fahrenheit of warming in the past 170 years. Along with that, is that like, are we expecting, could that go out of control? Like that's a legitimate kind of thing. But I think if you study the history of the planet, you look at, well, so CO2 levels today are 1/15th of their long-time historical high when life thrived. Temperatures today are 25 degrees Fahrenheit less than their long-time historical high where life thrived. So there's no reason to think we can't adapt to totally different. I mean, we have no idea how to increase CO2 as much as it has existed for a lot of this planet's history.
Mhm.
So I don't think there's any reason at all to think that the planet is going to come unlivable, that changes are going to happen on some crazy pace. There could be negatives, but overall, like a capable human species with ample machine power, we're going to keep making life better and better as long as we're free to. So I think that if you haven't studied these issues, it's important to look into. One shouldn't say it's impossible that there could be a catastrophe before looking into it. But I think if you look at the actual nature of what's called the greenhouse effect, how that works, how significant it is, what the historical context is in terms of where we are at CO2 levels, temperatures, there's no reason from a human perspective to think there's a catastrophe. But if you think that human impact is bad, then you'll think it's a catastrophe just because you think it's wrong for us to impact the earth. So the question with climate change is climate change bad because it's on balance bad for humans if we include with it the energy that comes with it? Or is it bad just because it's bad for us to change the climate? Just because we basically have a commandment that says thou shalt not change the climate. And I disagree with that religion of saying we shouldn't impact the planet. But I think that's a lot of what's driving people. Not that it's so bad for humans, they just think it's intrinsically bad to change the planet.
Well, I think that those ways that, like you mentioned, that the air is cleaner, I'm gonna have to look into that. Or if you have a study, I'll definitely, or air and water is cleaner, send
Yeah,
that
I mean,
over. I don't
chapter
think I
one
know.
of Moral Case for Fossil. I mean, if you want to look a quick reference, people go to fossilfueldebate.com. I debated Robert F. Kennedy Jr. last year. I tend to debate a lot of people, and I use that data in that debate, and so people can look there. But yeah, in terms of for the average human being, I mean, it's common sense for, I think, both of those, but certainly for water, like access to clean water now versus 200 years ago. I mean, anyone 200 years ago would think our clean water situation is a miracle.
Mhm. So in terms of the air and water being cleaner, I'm definitely gonna take a look at those studies, because I can't say off the top of my head whether it's and I don't know who measured, 50 years ago or 60 years
No, but
ago.
I mean, how could it not? How you think about people living in huts? I mean, you just look at today, the worst air quality problems are indoor air quality issues. People who are burning wood and animal dung indoors because they don't have the industrial society and like decentralized heating and power where they can, use cleaner fuels away from their home. So the natural state of things is basically everyone needs fuel to cook food and usually to heat because cold is a bigger problem for human beings than heat in most parts of the world. So you need to heat yourself. And the traditional way of doing that is burning whatever nature happens to make available to you, which is going to be basically the feces of animals or wood in trees until you've cut them all down, which is what happens in primitive places. So you got to burn those, and you need to get the heat directly from them or directly from some furnace. So you're going to be having tons of side effects, and that's millions of people in the world get respiratory issues at minimum from indoor air pollution. So, I mean, even if you compare that to a place like China, which isn't using the best pollution control technology, it's much worse than that. But if you take places like North Dakota using coal, where they have super clean air, there's just no question. I mean, I can show you the studies. The studies are on the website. But just anyone with any just knowledge of how things work has to know that we need to heat ourselves, that if we go with our most natural options, that's a really rough situation in terms of air quality along with everything else, and that today is much better, and there's every reason to think we can continue to make it better.
Mhm. No, again, I'm only thinking like in that, I would say that first world scenario, especially in the United States, how things, how the use of these certain fuels and these certain energy inputs have how we've made water streams cleaner, or we've made the energy, or in certain terms of the air, especially being in Southern California, especially where there's not so much airplanes flying around, the air is pretty damn clean. It looks a lot. So, I think this is another case, or, I think you would agree with this, is finding a way to actually, you know, use up the treatment of the air when all that stuff gets sprayed out, whether it's fuel or whatever comes off a jet plane when it's flying around. Because, there's definitely a difference when we've limited the amount of use from cars or airplanes. Just I've only been here a year and a half, and I can definitely see, a difference between then and now. And like I said, cars are much cleaner in terms of the kind of the outputs that we put in them.
Well, right now we're not. I mean, we're not doing much. But that's a good. The Corona case is a good one to look at because people will observe. Well, at least in certain areas like Los Angeles, where you still have some smog issues, they'll say, "Oh, well, there's less smog. Isn't this fantastic?" But to go back to one of my original points, you have to look at the full context. You have to look at what are the benefits and what are the side effects of being able to live a modern industrial life. So, of course, if you don't do something, you're not going to have the side effects from it. But life overall could be much worse. Just like if we don't use computers, we won't have computer viruses. That doesn't mean that. And so if we stop using computers, people could say, "Oh, isn't it amazing? I don't have to deal with computer viruses anymore." Isn't that? No, you would say, but your life is worse because you don't have this amazing power. And that's true with energy. As long as fossil fuels are by far the lowest cost form of energy for billions of people, the side effects that come with them, particularly if we use modern pollution control technology, are totally worth it. So people, just as people hundreds of years ago would burn wood, even though there was a ton of smoke, because it was overall good for their lives, so people do that with fossil fuels today. So when people, I would just suggest people think about, always look at, are people looking at the full context, or are they just looking at side effects out of context? And if they're just looking at side effects out of context to attack something that's overall beneficial, why are they doing that? And maybe it's because they don't value human life. Maybe they're ignorant, but maybe they don't value human life as much as they say. Maybe they think it's bad for us to impact the planet, and they're just looking for an excuse. And so they're misrepresenting what fossil fuels or other things do so that they can attack it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's completely. I mean, there are some Debbie Downers. That is definitely true. Some people who are very, very alarmist on the factors and issues. And I mean, you know, they see the images of the polar bears. They see the images of the ice caps melting. They see a forest being torn down. But I think there's definitely a bigger conversation there to figure out,
What about the image? What about the image of 8 million people being able to live and have more opportunity than ever, or even the images of there being way more polar bears? So there's just this.
Yeah.
I want to just keep coming back to. There's this. People aren't looking at the full context. They're assuming human impact is self-destructive, and they're not really valuing human life. I think it's mostly accidental on the part of most of us, but we have been taught to have this kind of framework of we're looking, I'm going to call it like the anti-impact framework, to just think that all of our impacts are bad and that we should stop. And I suggest looking at it from what I call a human flourishing framework. How do we allow, people to live to their fullest potential? And that means we need to impact the earth a lot. And so we should celebrate our intelligent impact on the earth, and we should just be trying to minimize our unintelligent impact.
Well, I want to tail this into the end because I want to be respectful of your time, and I want to go into, what are we doing in terms of, because obviously there is a side effect, there is a wouldn't call it runoff's not the word, but exhaust, runoff, certain things that come off from using these fossil fuels. What are some things that maybe or you guys are working on or studying of ways to capture, whether it's carbon or whether it's the opposites of this, and nuclear energy, because I know nuclear energy is a big one, and I know it's one of the best ways for us to get energy. But I'm pretty sure that once we get a facility running, they never stop running. That core reactor is going to always be either in use or be operated. You could probably fill me in a little bit more on that.
Well, I just want to say, so I mean, I'm somebody who analyzes these issues. I'm not producing any of the forms of energy. Yeah. So I'm not working on any technologies myself, but I think in general,
ones that you're familiar or aware of.
Yeah, but I think in general I disagree with the idea that we're on an unsustainable trajectory, that things are getting worse. I think things are getting better. So the question is, how can they get even better? That is, how can we get even more of the benefits of low cost energy, low cost machine power with fewer side effects? But I think what we have today is really good. So I don't mind that at all continuing. But if you look at, say, coal, oil, and gas, you just see in the general idea of pollution control, they have many different methods, and they're improving all the time to essentially capture the different kinds of emissions that can pollute air. There's also water type issues, but the biggest thing is air. I think it's a value to have clean air. You don't want perfectly clean air. You don't perfectly clean anything, but certainly in places like China, you would want, all things being equal, much cleaner air. And so the better we get at that, the better. But that's been developed, 50 years we've been improving, and I think that will continue to improve. And that's a great thing. In terms of nuclear, nuclear is an amazing technology, particularly for electricity generation. It's the only non-fossil fuel technology that we have any evidence can provide at least electricity on a global scale. So not heavy duty transportation is a real question, and some other forms of energy are a question, but electricity. So with nuclear, the key question is really, can it be produced at a comparably low cost to fossil fuels? Because most places it's more expensive. And I think the key issue there is policy. I think right now we criminalize nuclear energy. We treat it as very unsafe, whereas it's actually the safest form of energy. And so we put so many restrictions on it that it just takes forever to build and costs a lot. And the analogy I use is that if you said, if somebody said to you, I forget, what's your first name?
Brandon.
Brandon.
Know me about bus driver.
I should know that by now. I just know you as the basketball playing bus driver. But Brandon, I'm worried for your safety. You're only allowed to go out if you have 5 bodyguards with you. I'm worried about that. I don't know how much money you make, but for most people, 5 bodyguards, that's a big expense. Let's say it's going to cost you, $350,000 a year. It would be expensive to be you. So you just think about the same thing for nuclear. If people are saying this is so dangerous, we need all these bodyguards in effect policing it all the time, it's going to become super expensive. So I think the key thing that needs to happen with nuclear is to decriminalize it, to recognize that it's actually safe, to identify the actual risk areas, which are pretty minimal, and have laws based on those. And I think once that happens, then you'll have a huge amount of innovation, and people will pursue that. So from my perspective is never on, I know what technology is best. It's, I want the policy framework where the smart innovators in energy, and I'm not one of them, I'm just an observer, or the smart innovators in energy can compete and create the best products. And it's part of why I'm so emphatic about freedom. So we really need freedom and decriminalization for nuclear. And I think that plus freedom for fossil fuels, and really freedom for everything else. But I think most of the innovation will come from fossil fuels and nuclear for the foreseeable future. I think that will lead to lower cost energy for everyone and more opportunity for certainly for the poorest people in the world to have energy and to benefit from it, but really a better world for all of us.
So I mean, the reason people would assume are alarmed are, the two or three cases, I would say, that, where there have been negative events that happen with nuclear things. I mean, I do understand nuclear power, especially in France. I mean, they have a major benefit that they do have one of the biggest modern countries, or, one of the first world countries that uses nuclear power to power its electrical units in its country. But we definitely have the stigma here from Chernobyl, and I would say 3 Mile.
Well, in Chernobyl, but see, that's interesting because Chernobyl is the only one with actual deaths. So 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, those are both with no deaths from
Yeah.
radiation. So it's another case where you have to ask by what standard are people evaluating it from? Because if you have your worst energy accident and it has 0 deaths, if you look at the non-communist world, I mean, the communist world, everything malfunctioned. One economist said, like their Soviet toasters caused God knows how many thousands of deaths. Like when you have a communist country and there's no regard for individual rights, people make everything dangerous. But if you look at the civilized world, the free world, there's no deaths from these major accidents. Even Chernobyl, you're talking in the order of 100. You're not talking about, if a dam breaks, you could easily have 100,000 deaths. And like a natural gas facility, you could easily have 1,000 deaths depending on what it is. So nuclear is actually the safest, and the accidents where it's gone wrong show that it's safe. I'm not against those other forms of energy. I still think they're worth it, but we have to be very worth it. We have to be very objective that this is the safest. And I think that the reason people regard nuclear as unsafe, even though it's actually the safest, is because they're not evaluating it by how good is this for human flourishing. They're evaluating it by how little impact does this have. And they think it's somehow unnatural for us to split the atom, and they think of it as playing God. We're just taught to think, oh, if we're impacting nature in a new way, that's gotta be bad, versus actually looking at the evidence and saying, no, wait, this way of impacting nature is actually safer because, for example, like a nuclear reaction, a fission reaction, for a power plant, it literally can't explode. It's much safer than something like a dam that can burst, or natural gas facility that can explode. As just the reality of it from a human perspective is this is a very safe technology. The history confirms that, but it's the philosophy that's looking at the history from an anti-impact perspective that makes people think it's bad.
Mm-hmm. No, one of the main reasons why I had you on is from talking with you, I can totally see this, even though we might not agree on everything with fossil fuels. The idea is that, people really need to weigh out what it takes to run a civilization, what it takes to run a city, a country, this world. And if we want things to operate, we want things to effectively move certain ways, and you want to go away from the ways that have been working or the things that we have been doing, there's going to be negative repercussions. There's going to be certain things that we're not going to be able to do to continue life the way it is. So, I think that people really have to weigh that out, whether they're, climate alarmist or, they don't believe that there are any negative effects. I'm not saying you're one of those. You're definitely way out. There's warming of the planet. There's, obviously something we have to continuously do to be able to improve upon the technologies that we have. But, people really need to think about what the world, how it works and why it works the way it does, and how we make it better for the 8 billion people. We're scratching 8 billion, but how do we make it better for everybody, which is an almost impossible feat, but we're pushing, we're doing it.
Yeah. So I would say freedom, including the freedom to use fossil fuels and nuclear energy. And if people are interested in more, we have a website, industrialprogress.com, and we have a weekly newsletter, and you can check out all of our stuff there. But yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to be on the show.
No, thank you so much for taking time out of your day. And guys, you can go check guys and ladies, you can go check him out over on Twitter. It's Alex Epstein 22. Am I right? Or is
No,
it
no,
Alex Epstein?
that's Instagram. No, and
That's
on Twitter
Instagram.
I got Alex Epstein. Fortunately, so it's just Alex Epstein on Twitter. But if, you search for my name on the internet, it's pretty easy to find these things.
Yeah, trust me. I've there's a Brandon Reese artist who I guess he's been making art before I was Brandon Reese. So I
Yeah,
don't
well,
know if Brandon Reese.
there's an Epstein recently who's been having a lot of people make fun of my name.
Oh man, that sucks. Yeah, I got that joke. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for everybody else who was tuning in. Remember, you can go check out the show iTunes, and we're on YouTube. You can watch the show visually. Stitcher, SoundCloud, everywhere you consume podcasts, we are there. More shows coming out next week, or these shows will be out today, wherever you're consuming these. Thank you again, and Alex, thank you so much.
Hey, good to talk to you.